We're talking about people who can help manage the stress that comes up when they have to miss 3 weeks and feel disengaged from their team. They feel like they've lost their identity, or a parent suddenly dies. And meanwhile, they got to get full load of classes and they've got practice. So it's helping them manage through that really challenging period of time. Over the years, we've recognized that they need more support because the institution asks more of them, but still, it never feels like it's enough.
That was Karen Weaver. Karen was one of the first women in America to get an athletic scholarship under Title IX, and now she's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania and an expert in college athletics. Fun fact, Karen, when she was at Salisbury University, went on to become both USA Today's Coach of the Year and the university's Faculty Member of the Year. I don't know how many people have done both, but it must be a short list. And we had a great conversation about all the things that are reshaping college athletics, from the transfer portal to NIL and more. One quick programming note is that when we recorded this a while back, we talked about the National Labor Relations Board approving the Dartmouth men's basketball team's unionization. The new administration has since rescinded that. And so while that's no longer valid, I think the discussion of all the implications certainly are. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Connected College podcast. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've helped more than 100 colleges and universities change what they offer, how they operate, and how they're organized to enable student success. If you're a leader in higher ed and you think that the silos and separations get in the way of student success, then this podcast and my upcoming book, The Connected College, are for you. We're here to learn and work together to bust silos, question tradition, and forge partnerships so that students feel connected to their college, their community, their coursework, and their careers. I think a great way to get started talking about college athletics is to hear how you got started and got involved, where you took it. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I attended college primarily because I came from a line of educators. Paying for college was a different story. I was one of the very first women in the U.S. to get a scholarship, athletic scholarship, under Title IX. And that
Wow.
enabled me to go to college. And the other aspirations I had in making the national team in field hockey, that experience excited me to get into coaching. The success that I had academically as an undergrad, and then going on to get my master's degree right away, the support system that I had from both of those campuses, incredibly important to help me see that the value for me may be staying in higher ed for the rest of my life, which I have, which has been great.
That's awesome. Well, we're glad you're here. And I would love to hear your definition of student success. How do you think about it? How do you define it? How do you measure it?
Well, we know that every student comes to us with a different background, a different set of academic and aspirational needs. And sometimes things come along and turn it upside down. In athletics, we tend to have more resources built in for academic support, managing their schedules. We're getting better at taking care of mental health needs. And those things can originate from the athletics department. Over the years, we've recognized that they need more support because the institution asks more of them. And it's a big balancing act between their practice and competitive schedules and all the extraneous things they do and taking a full course load. Athletic departments are cognizant of that. They've built those support services into their budgets, but still, it never feels like it's enough.
It sounds like a key part of student success is students feeling supported, in particular, student athletes.
Yes, absolutely.
What role do you think collegiate athletics plays in student success, both for student athletes, but also for the broader university community?
Well, I think it's different from campus to campus. Some of it has to do with the large cultural heritage that athletics brings. You look at a Penn or a Harvard or a Yale or a Michigan or Ohio State. People are aware how long they've had an athletics tradition on those campuses. But other small schools like Whittier or Ohio Northern, they're named for other things as well besides athletics. So Athletics plays a complementary role, but not necessarily the predominant role that they do in some of these older institutions.
So, athletics is part of the history, it's part of the heritage more broadly for the community. How does it contribute to student success, more specifically for student athletes?
Oh, so for athletes, it gives them a schedule. It gives them a routine, right? It gives them a chance to feel celebrated. Their matches or games are promoted in the campus newspaper, local newspapers, and websites. Lots of Instagram photos, TikTok videos. Those will work in social media tracking for institutions. Say that on average, about 60% of the engagements of the university's social media posts is around athletics. But it attracts a
Wow.
lot of attention to the campus, particularly when the team or teams is having success.
Before we were talking about the Dartmouth decision by the
Yeah.
National Labor Relations Board, that strikes me as one of the things that's changing in college athletics. Can you talk about that and maybe some of the other things that are changing how this all happens?
Well, the question is who will it affect and how quickly might it affect? In the Dartmouth case, they are a private Ivy League school inside a conference with other private Ivy League schools. This case is unique at this point to that conference. We had
Hmm.
a similar ruling back in 2014 with a Northwestern football team who wanted to do the same thing. Of course,
Which
we
is
know that
unionized.
it was
So
unionized. Great. Join a union. We know that Northwestern at that time was the only private school in the Big Ten. While the regional office agreed they could form a union, the national office determined they should not, simply because it would be creating again competitive imbalance between the publics and the privates. The National Labor Relations Boards only affects private employers, not
mhm.
public. That's what's different about the Ivy League, is that we're all private, right? And on Dartmouth's case, they had a number of student unions already for the cafeteria workers and other places where the students could negotiate for their working conditions, that they actually had a seat at the table. And that's what the men's basketball team has successfully argued for.
The Dartmouth thing seems like it's part of a broader trend, which is thinking about student athletes as university employees. I know there's talk of potentially compensating them.
Well, it could be for some schools. Some of the really big, powerful, we get $58 million a year from our media contract partners type of schools. Yes, it could. But even in Dartmouth's case, the director who ruled said that it wasn't about whether Dartmouth made money on men's basketball or not, but that they wore Dartmouth uniforms because they were asked and or insinuated to be in various Dartmouth events where they were asking alumni for money for their team or for the university, being a PR extension of the university. And that athletes did not control their schedules. An example they gave was they're told when to get on the bus, when to eat, where to stay,
Right.
even if they can get a haircut on a trip. And they said the level of control that the university exercises over these athletes functions exactly like an employer. So it's not about the money, it's about the control. And I think
And
that's the thing that makes it more challenging across all of higher ed, because as a former coach, I can say this, we do like to control our teams.
and what about you mentioned social media and college athletics driving 60% engagement? I would imagine that's also reshaping college athletics.
I don't think schools really pay attention to their social media engagement until they have a successful team advancing through the tournament. I did a podcast with some economics researchers who studied the trend of a Cinderella run in March Madness. Like for
Hmm.
the underdog a couple of years ago was Seton Hall. Other schools have made runs through the tournament. As soon as that happens, everybody points, look, everybody's talking about us on Instagram and Twitter and on news outlets. And so they instantly say, see, here's the reason we invested. I asked the economist, okay, what does this mean? Yes, there's awareness. Does it translate to applications? Does it translate into enrollment? Does it translate into retention? That jury is still really out. So it
Interesting.
gets some name brand recognition, but how long that lasts is very much up in the air.
So no one's done the study correlating or found a direct correlation between application and enrollment.
There's been plenty of media attention to applications. Yes, I want to go to Seton Hall now because their men's
Yeah,
basketball team is really good. There's been plenty of that. But we know that has to translate into a more selective class, acceptance is actually enrolling, and then also retention. So we don't have nearly as much data on that.
gotcha. So people are interested in applying, but they may not necessarily get accepted, enroll, retain, graduate.
Exactly.
So it's sort of affecting the the funnel, but not necessarily how people.
Maybe not for every single one.
And what about name, image, and likeness? That and the transfer portal are the
Yeah,
two other things that I hear most frequently.
we have coaches on the ground doing the recruiting for the athletes. They're not recruiting for the student body. But because NIL has been in the news so much, athletes think if I don't ask, I'm kind of dumb because I do have the opportunity to make some money. My family expects me to make money. That's what everybody tells me I'm worth. So the first thing that comes up is not the academic or the ability to get a degree. It's about how much will you pay me a month or what kind of deals can I get? And that has upended the conversation for athletes about the value of their degree. And you combine that with the transfer portal, where if I'm not happy, I can go, which you and I, as employees of an institution, could do that anyway. So we understand that from the worker comp, but we're not used to thinking of athletes of having transient rights. And yet, that's part of the issue that people have said you've created an unnecessary restraint of trade for your college athletes because of these restrictions on not being able to make money, not being able to transfer.
It's really interesting as a downstream consequence. I a lot about how after the Great Recession, when much of the financial burden shifted from the state to the student, colleges raised tuition. I think there was always some hesitancy to think about a student as a customer. Once your business model is entirely tuition driven, you can't think of them as anything but a customer. Once student athletes are compensated different ways, they're going to start to think and organize like employees, the compensation, flexibility, mobility, and all the things that come with it.
Even in collective bargaining, a lot of things that I hear athletes talking about is that we need better health and safety protections. For most union people, they say that's the ground floor of this.
Yeah.
That's fundamental.
And it then benefits
Yeah.
working conditions, schedules, hours, compensation, incentives.
About 10 years ago, during March Madness, a UConn basketball player by the name of Shabazz Napier was interviewed after one of the games. They said, "How you feeling?" He goes, "Well, I'm actually feeling kind of hungry." And they said, "Well, what do you mean? You're here at the Final Four and you're hungry?" He goes, "Oh, yeah. There are many nights I go to sleep at night because we got back too late and the cafeteria was closed. There was no money to get us extra food. And I ran out of money at the end of the month." This is a UConn men's basketball player on
Oh
the
my
biggest
gosh.
stage of college sports. The fastest I've ever seen the NCAA make a change was 10 days after he said that, they introduced regulations to allow for more money, more flexible spending so athletes could get, as he said, I need 8,000 calories a day. It's those kinds of things that higher education has been blind to. And that's what's really got us in this pickle.
Let's talk about people who have solved for this pickle. I would love to hear colleges and universities that are really supporting student athletes and the broader student community where athletics is a key part of student success.
Every school does what they can with the resources they have. When they live in a metropolitan area, they tend to have access to more ideas, more opportunities in a small town in the middle of the state. That's where we really have to think carefully about access to healthcare, rehabilitation. I've worked at very small schools and I've worked at very large schools. The difference is vast. What's really changing too is most athletes are dependent upon their parents' health care. Their parents' health care is supposed to absorb 80% of the healthcare costs, and then the athletic department pays 20. One time when I was an AD at a small college, I had athletes who were on a lot of financial aid. And we went out to a cross country meet at an away site. And at the end of the meet, he came in injured. And he was clear that he had really busted up his leg somehow. There was an ambulance on site, and we got him into the ambulance. And the guy says, "Okay, well, we're going to take you to the hospital." He got up so fast and hopped out of that ambulance. He says, "My family can't afford to have me. We have a $10,000 deductible on our health care plan. We can't afford to send me to the
Oh
hospital."
my gosh.
I wonder, and there's been no studies that I've come across, how the change in the healthcare dynamics for employers, for parents, might be playing a role in some of this. How do they pay those medical bills? And yet, I think that's the foundation of what we're asking from athletes is we'll make sure you get through this experience with being taken care of. And that's, I think, a fundamental belief for the athletes too.
So it sounds like your first piece of advice is really to think about care and healthcare and everything that comes with it, whether it's
Yeah,
facilities, insurance, rehab, resources.
yeah.
Um,
Mental health.
right.
And it's not just performance psychologists. That used to be the thing. Oh, we have a sports psychologist. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who can help manage the stress that comes up when they have to miss 3 weeks and feel disengaged from their team. They feel like they've lost their identity, or a parent suddenly dies. And meanwhile, they got to get full load of classes and they've got practice. So it's helping them manage through that really challenging period of time. They flunked a class they didn't expect to flunk. Now, am I still going to get to keep my scholarship? Those kinds of things are real.
I think that the thing you said earlier about student athletes get more support because more is asked of them, I think is such an interesting point, and it makes a ton of sense because these setbacks that are a normal part of college, like a bad grade or a sick parent, they just get amplified by your extra demands. And it might be financial stress about a scholarship, it might be about having less time, less control, less
Yeah.
flexibility.
Yeah.
That really resonates with me. Are there examples of people that are really doing a great job keeping pace or anticipating those changes? I see a lot of student athlete support centers, for
Mhm.
instance, Clemson and Oregon and others. What are the things in that vein that are really helping to enable student success?
You mentioned Clemson and Oregon, and those are two good examples. They have built athlete villages that encompass everything an athlete would need during his or her typical day. These are mostly for football and basketball, but other schools have other sports on them. They have academic counseling, sports psychology, athletic training, strength training, mental health support, all under one or two roofs, all within a quick walk across the way. And the logic behind that has been we want to make sure that they don't dawdle around campus and waste time. So this is more efficient for them. Some would argue that it removes that population from the rest of the campus. How do I get an appointment in the health center? Well, it'll be 3 weeks. Athletics department doesn't have time for that in some situations. So they're hoping that they have enough support in house. That creates another set of challenges, but it is a way of doing it. So I think that, like every other department on campus, athletics is struggling with do we have enough staff to support our needs? And some, as they grow their staffs, are seeing, I don't know how big some of these staffs need to be for these athletes to feel like, okay, I can get the help I need whenever I need it. And we'll tell you one thing that, and I've had some very experienced athletic trainers tell me this, that it's gotten to the point now where every team has at least one athletic trainer assigned to them. So if I have 36 teams, I have 36 or more athletic trainers. Every single one of them feels the need and is being asked to be on 24-hour, 7-day a week call by any of the athletes on that team. Now, they're not mental health specialists, they're not nutritionists, they're not any of those kinds of things, but they're sort of the funnel. I've got this going on. What should I do? And that's taking a real toll on that group because they can't be all things to all people.
So trainers are kind of the first point of contact, and the number of things they're contacted about is growing and the needs are increasing. So that's becoming a real staffing
Very much
pain
so.
point. Huh,
Very much.
that's really interesting. So we've got think about healthcare, and in particular mental health. We've got think about pros and cons of kind of dedicated support and facilities versus mixing with the broader population. We've got think about how to support trainers as kind of like the first line of defense or support. What else is on your checklist for athletics and student success?
Nutrition, like Shabazz Napier talked about, this is still a common problem on many campuses. The cafeteria is closed when they get back from a trip. And on campuses, they call them now refueling stations. They have little mini convenience stores where you can get a Gatorade or go get a bottle of milk or get some power bar kind of things whenever you're in that building. So that's a step in the right direction to continually fuel your body. But I don't know how many Division II and Division III schools are doing that. I think Division I schools have gotten that down. But, we had so a lot of them. They travel and they can't just function on 3 meals a day, especially at 2 of those meals because we can only afford it or at a fast food place, right?
It seems like the broader lesson is audit your policies and your procedures relative to their feasibility for student
Yeah,
athletes. If the cafeteria is closed by the time you get back from a game or you can't afford food, that tracks with how higher ed is working on auditing policies and procedures through the lens of the adult learner, where somebody who's working full time can't show up to the office to sign a
right.
form from 9 to 5.
Exactly.
But understanding who your students are and looking at how reasonable are these policies and requirements given their schedule or their resources.
Exactly. I even saw at one of my positions, if the team got back at 11 o'clock at night and they lived off campus, they had nowhere to get there unless somebody took them because they didn't have a car. They couldn't afford a car. So, how do we get them back to where they need to safely be at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the morning? Sometimes athletes thought that through, but sometimes something falls through, like a ride from a parent, a ride from a sibling. Then what?
Karen, Dr. Weaver, this is a great conversation, and I really appreciate your insights on athletics and student success. Any final advice you have for higher ed administrators, ADs, and coaches as they think about athletics and student success?
I think these things make a huge difference to the student athlete. And if you want to retain them, we think about shiny facilities, nice locker rooms, something that's new and modern. I get that. And that's important too, because many athletes coming out of high school now come out of newer high schools, and our college athletic facilities have not kept up. So that's important. But these other things make just as much of a difference. If they feel like the school hasn't thought through how they're going to do mental health, how they're going to give the trainers a break, how they're going to solve nutrition, they're going to see that equally as frustrating and look for other alternatives.
It's kind of like an ecosystem
Yes,
or a support system. It's more than shiny new facilities, which you seems like you kind of need those too. You can't forget about all these other ways to support student athletes and students more broadly.
right.
Thanks for listening to the Connected College podcast. Subscribe to my Connected College newsletter at elliottfelix.com for insights and excerpts from my upcoming book, tools you can download, and special offers. You can also find more information about talks I've given, articles I've written, and upcoming events there. And please support the podcast by rating and reviewing it wherever you're listening. Let's create connected colleges where students will succeed.